What do I really think about Eckhart Tolle? Eckhart Tolle is awesome. He's one of the best and clearest writers on the topic of realization that I've ever seen. In fact, if you've never read The Power of Now, just turn off the video, go buy the book, and read it. Actually, watch the end of the video, and then go buy the book and read it. It's really good. So the first time I read the book was many years after awakening. I was pleasantly surprised when I started reading it that it transmits very clearly. He really is masterful at using very simple and direct language, very accessible, reasonably non-spiritual, although he does use spiritual terminology, to transmit something that's a living truth, the actuality of realization. What's so masterful about it is the language he uses is sort of deceptively simple. It almost sounds like New Age. You could read a New Age book, and if you didn't have any of that deeper prompting that allows transmission to resonate with you, they would just sound the same. Another thing that's very interesting in the way he writes it almost sounds like it's giving the ego something, like you're going to get something out of it. But ultimately, this really isn't about getting something. This process isn't about making yourself happier or finding what you think you want, because all of those desires or drives of the ego are ultimately linked to suffering. And yet, when you read The Power of Now, it really doesn't trigger the ego too much, if at all. I think at worst, some people just think it's mumbo jumbo. They don't get anything out of it. But it's not super triggering, which is really important with transmission, because the ability to slip it past the goalie, so to speak, or fly under the radar with the transmission is just as important as the ability to actually relay the message of the living possibility of transformation, of realization, of awakening. So again, his book really strikes that perfect combination of authentic transmission, which without that, there's really no point in reading a spiritual book, in my opinion, or at least about awakening. And simplicity, meaning it's easy to digest, easy to understand, and it slips past the ego for the most part. It's pretty darn good at almost making the ego feel like it's getting something out of it. So this magical balance is certainly why I would say he's one of the best, if not the best, writers as far as being able to transmit the living possibility of awakening and realization to the masses, to a very, very wide audience. When you read his writing, you don't get a jargon-heavy, doctrine-laden tome. You just get a simple and direct sense that there's something beyond what you've been taking yourself to be, life as you've learned to think about it. There are many great books out there on more technical details about awakening, realization, Buddhism, Advaita, etc. But that kind of writing will just filter out many people who don't identify as a Buddhist or identify as Hindu or Advaita or a spiritual person or a religious person. There are many skeptical, scientific-minded people who are kind of adverse to spiritual terminology, religious doctrine, spiritual doctrine, etc. And I think The Power of Now can appeal to pretty much anyone because it's so simple, so direct and accessible, and it feels personal, like it's about you, like he's talking to you. I also think he transmits pretty well verbally or when he's speaking to people. If you just check out some of his videos, he's got a bunch of free videos online, you might recognize that he really does speak from a place of clarity, presence, unbound being. Now, I've seen some criticisms of his work. One is that he's too simple. He talks about awakening, realization, spirituality, etc., in too simple of a way, not technical enough. I think generally speaking, if that's your impression, you might be a little too fixated on details. Realization is a very, very simple thing. Liberation is a very, very simple thing. Unfiltered reality is not complex in any way. It's simple and obvious, immediate, innocent. There's no parts to it. How complex could it be? There's no separation, objects, structure. How complex could it possibly be? So that's my general impression when people will say, well, he's too simple. He's not enlightened enough. I would say, how can you even know that? What filters are you looking through that make you look at him and say he's not enlightened? Also, just for fun, if you read Amazon reviews like I do, and you see that he has some 1-star reviews, the descriptions are always the same. They're like, this is complete mumbo jumbo. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's just a word salad. So that's fine. That's just somebody who really is not ready for the transmission at all. They're just not interested in it. They're not inclined to wake up. So it's going to sound like word salad to them. It's going to sound like mumbo jumbo. It's going to make no sense at all. And that's fine. But there are countless reviews of people who say that reading this book changed their life, their perspective, got them on a spiritual path, or even led to awakening for them. I know many people personally for whom reading this book was really their entry point. It's probably the most common book I would recommend to somebody who's interested in awakening or interested in getting started on the spiritual path, or just curious about it, but isn't necessarily religious or spiritual or has an understanding of Buddhism or Eastern thought or traditions, etc. So to summarize, I highly recommend the book, The Power of Now. I've read some of his second book. It's also very good. And check out his videos as well. You might find a lot of value there.